I wanted to sort of start with the gap analysis on this, and as we talk, a lot of the conversation today has been how do you take old, tedious manual processes and automate them to both improve them, but also just to free up time. And let's bring that to the identity and access management question. Where are we now, knowing that there's a wide variety from agency to agency? So maybe talk about at your agency, where does IAM stand at the moment, and how do you see it being able to be improved and move forward? And Robert, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Robert Hembrook, the Director of Cybersecurity, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. How many people know what NOAA is and what NOAA does? Yay! That's a good thing. NOAA is about 20,000 employees, about split evenly between the federal side and the contract side. But what that does is it breaks folks into several different categories based on who they are and what they do. So you've got NOAA Corps uniform service employees who wear the uniform and fly our planes and drive our ships. You've got federal employees like myself. You've got contract employees. You've got foreign nationals, and you have temporary workers. Each one of those fits into a different bin depending on what they have. I have a CAC card because why? I'm a federal employee and I have a CAC card, not a PIV card, because NOAA has CACs because we've uniformed service people, and that way they can get on and off of military bases, on and off of ships, because we work a lot with the Navy and we work with the other military services for weather and other things. So I have a CAC card, which makes me different than a federal employee, but foreign nationals don't qualify for a CAC card because of the level of encryption that's on it, so they have to get a PIV. So there's different types of cards that we have to issue. There's also different requirements for who gets one and who doesn't. If you're a contract employee, you might not be on the contract long enough to actually get that card. So therefore, you might get some sort of temporary token. So you've got that overlay first. That's one set of axes of the data that we have to have. The other set of axes you have is what kind of access do you have to those systems? When it comes to physical security, we talked a little bit about cybersecurity. The hardest thing to tighten up is the nut behind the keyboard, right? So how do you make sure that the person who's sitting at that keyboard is the person who's supposed to be there on the machine they're supposed to be on, doing the things that they're supposed to do? That's the fundamental thing for stopping the insider threat. That's for stopping loss of intellectual property. That's for stopping of espionage, right? So how do you know that? Well, you use your CAC card or you use your PIV card to scan into the card reader that lets you into the building. Then you plug it in the side of your computer and you make it work. Now once you're logged onto your computer, which takes about, if you've ever looked at the mission essential process threads that your organization has to go through, your MEFs or whatever, you realize you need about 5 different systems just to do what I just said. To walk into the building, sit at your chair, plug your card in and get on the machine, get to Google, because we use Google for Government as our email provider. You have to use about 5 different systems, all of which are FISMA systems at various different high, moderates, and lows, all of which have to be certified and accredited and go through the ATO process. The reason I'm going through this really long story is it's not just about the card in your wallet. There's a whole lot of interdependencies that work in there. And so if we could automate all that great stuff, that would be fantastic, because once I plug my CAC card in, I'm in front of my computer, I then use user ID and password to log into Google, along with a 2-factor authentication code that I get off a code generator on my cell phone. So we're not even integrated in with that yet to use the CAC and PIV card. So my identity and access management, once I'm logged in, I get an email saying I have to update something in my personnel record. So then I go to my personnel record, which is run by a different agency, and use user ID and password with no 2-factor authentication to log into that. Or I use my CAC card and my PIV credentials to get to another location to get into that, and on and on and on it goes. And that's why all of us have 27 different passwords in the back of our head that are constantly being changed, and thanks to NIST, who then rescinded that rule recently, there are 16 characters long with upper and lower case, special characters, this, that, and the other. Can't have more than 3 characters of the same type in a row, and all these other things which actually do nothing towards securing you better than if you just put in a 30-character password that's the first line of your favorite song. That's actually more secure. So we go through all these machinations to get where we are, and then the authentication mechanism we use, is it identity access management stuff, or is it stuff down to using LDAP? So we've got both, but at least they both cost a lot of money, right? We can't retire LDAP to take over the new system until we get all those things converted. And Mr. Arietta very wisely talked about how it takes a lot of effort to take all those old legacy applications and convert them over. So, I don't want to take up and monopolize the time because I am.
You did a great job of showing that there's plenty of room for improvement, I think.
I want to set those ground conditions first because there is so much room for everybody, but I don't want to steal everybody's time.
Well, and Tom, luckily DoD has a really simple, streamlined process.
Sure, yeah, there's no complications there.
So you want to pick up on this of where we are and where you're trying to go?
Yeah, so Secretary of Defense has 3 lines of effort. One of them is lethality, and how identity management and intelligent automation plays into that is when you have a soldier on the battlefield, they don't want to be struggling for their CAC card to be able to fire the weapon that they have the authority to fire, or they need to get online to get an analysis done. They don't have a CAC card necessarily to do that, or do they have the way to authenticate back to a central authority to assure that's the right CAC, the right person to get that done. So there's a gap there, and the technology we have and the systems we have, both back office and out in the pointy end of the spear. We're making do, not as well as we'd like, especially with cybersecurity where we have to use passwords and things to get to systems. But there's a gap there. So it's a gap between the credential itself and our systems and the mission. The next item is alliances and partnerships. So we have alliances with well over 100 countries around the world, and they don't all use our PIV or CAC. So how do we get them two-factor authentication that enables them to fight with us in our mission? And the third is business reform. So how do we do things cheaper, faster, smarter? Right now, I think it was, I'm trying to remember Grace Hopper, famous admiral, helped bring automation and IT into the Department of Defense, and it was her birthday. And WT said, we wanted to find out the oldest production code on the planet. Anybody want to guess where it is? Department of Defense. And it's MOCAS. It's a contract. For those of you contractors out there, we support you partly by one of the oldest systems on the planet. It's in production. So how do we get CAC or derived credentials or any other identity management other than username and password into that system? We have multitudes of systems like that. We're moving to the cloud. There was a notice both from the Secretary of Defense and DepSecDef that we're moving to the cloud. So how do we bring new technologies for identity management in the cloud and benefit to all the artificial intelligence and robotic process automation and other things that the cloud will enable us to do with the right credentials. So we have a gap in all those places. So looking forward to hearing from you later on how you can help us.
Yeah, and Shane, if you could pick up on that. I mean, you work with a wide range of agencies across government.
Yeah, definitely.
If you can talk about sort of where you see things on the spectrum that didn't get touched on there, and also if I could ask you to sort of start on how these tools that we're talking about start to change that equation a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I'm Shane Cashdollar with KPMG Federal. I've been doing identity and access management for about 13 years, so it's always been near and dear to my heart. And I think you guys hit on the points exactly right? So those are the gaps. And if you remember in Tony and Kirk's presentation there, said it was only between 40 and 60% of applications in an organization are connected to IAM, right? That's not good enough. That's how we define success with an IAM system. The more things that are connected to it. It could be the best system in the world if it interacts with one of the systems you need to do your job and not the 5 others. But how good is it, right? And I think it's an exciting time right now because with all the modernization efforts that Jose talked about, with all the move to the cloud, and with this rise of AI and kind of robotic being able to automate these processes and add some intelligence into these processes, it's going to enable us to do much better there, right? So there's the base level of identity and access management where it's security and compliance, right? That's why people did this. They wanted to check that box and say, okay, I'm secure, I'm going to pass my next audit, that's good enough, I'm going to move on to the next thing, right? But we all need to move up that pyramid, right? So what's after security and compliance? It's the automating of those processes, right? It's time savings. And then really the pinnacle that we have to strive for, and I think we should take some cues from commercial in this, is really user experience, right? That's our end goal, right? And you look at the retail sector, right? Amazon and Cisco and these guys, Google, they're doing it right, because if they don't, they're done, right? The customer's on to the next site to buy the same thing from somewhere else. So I think for a long time, we thought about it differently. Here in the federal space, well, we're not a retailer. We're not selling things. Like, we need to be secure and that's it. But we need to think of our end users as customers, right? So whether it's the soldier on the battlefield that's struggling with his card to do something on the field, we need to think of that person not as a user, but as a customer, and kind of address them as such, right?
And Robert, are those the are those the other benefits that you're looking toward at NOAA? I mean, we talk about security, we talk about automation. What are the metrics for success as you look to try and improve the IAM system?
Well, metrics is a good word for that, because you have to kind of be careful what you're asking for, because you just might get it, right? And so that's really a problem. We had a real big push a couple years ago in the federal government with the cyber sprint, where we're reporting our PIV statistics and our how many people have access to this. Those numbers-driven sorts of things without context for why you're doing that can really, you can get into what you're talking about is a compliance. I checked the box. Okay, what about making the network safe? And that's really what we want to try and do is you talk to your CFO instead of your CIO, and what is he telling you? You need to reduce your risk posture, and you need to find ways to be more efficient. Well, okay, and cybersecurity is kind of a sunk cost. That's the way it's viewed, and that's the way we're treated, right? It's just money you put away to go do something with. And then they come back to you and say, well, tell me what this means. How much am I getting by buying this much of it? And so the real answer is you need to make that granularized. And one of the biggest wins you can get is simplifying the identity and access portion of it, because of the time, speed, distance portion that comes with it. How much time do you have spending your time resetting passwords on dozens of systems because you can't remember them all? Or do you drive your employees to writing them down on a piece of paper stuck under their keyboard, which is riskier even more so? So you've got to be careful about what you're talking about when it comes time to savings and economy, because thanks to the federal government, I'm now a personnel manager, I'm now a financial expert, I'm now all these other things I have to do, because they put all this stuff on websites for us to do instead of having people to do it themselves. Someone else saved money by getting rid of employees who did all that work, but they pushed it all onto us. So now I have to do all that in addition to my regular day job. So it's by the same way with identity management. How do you make sure that when you plug that card in, it's actually saving you time and effort, and not just an additional cost on top of something that's no more secure now than it was 10 minutes ago?
Tom, are those the sort of obstacles that you're wrestling with? What are the big problems that you're trying to solve in IAM right now? Is it that making sure the workload is reduced and not just pushed around? Is it to deal with the legacy systems that can't tie into your to the broader framework? What's the big problem for you?
So maybe out in industry, but also in the military, we have a thing called crawl, walk, run. And we are definitely crawling to walk with PKI and CAC, similar to what our colleague from NOAA said. We had a cyber sprint and we have a cyber scorecard, and mostly because of antiquated systems, we had a long road to hoe to get CAC enablement to all our systems. And then we had to come with alternatives, because no matter how hard we tried, some just wouldn't meet mission, because again, we talked about interoperability with our partners, interoperability with first responders, industry and contractors, so we had to come up with other alternatives for that. We used the 50-pound hammer approach, really known, hard to implement stuff, but it got the job done. So the next iteration is how do we do it cheaper, faster, smarter, and is somewhat future-proof, or at least gets us on the track to future-proofing. And how do we reap some of the benefits? So we're taking baby steps in some cases. We're doing that crawl bit. We have one of our first continuous diagnostic and monitoring for IDAM. We have a thing called Defense Manpower Data Center. It actually keeps track of all our CACs for us. And back after the Navy Yard shooting, everybody familiar with the Navy Yard shooting? We had somebody get on the Navy Yard that shouldn't have. So we created an identity matching engine for security. And what happens is, if you're an installation, camp poster installation that has this, when you go on base, they check your ID card either from a machine, right there as you go in the gate, or a hand reader, and it immediately does a series of background checks. And as an example, since 2014 to today, we've recaptured over 8 million CACs from people who shouldn't have those CACs. We have stopped approximately 40,000 felons from coming on the base. So we're trying to figure out how to incorporate not only the CAC, but should that person still have that CAC or piece of identity? Yep. Other ones are, I heard the gentleman mention before, other transaction authorities. One of the things, back to Secretary Mattis, he is a driver, and we want to move fast and forward as quickly as we can with lethality, interoperability, partnerships, and reform. So we're using other transaction authorities, and we're taking risks, calculated risks. He says often, and he's right, we send 17 and 18-year-olds downrange taking all kinds of risks. Yep. We take calculated risks for the mission. We need to do that in the back office, including with our identity management. So we've worked with other transaction authorities, a thing called DIUX. Who's heard of DIUX? It's implants out in Boston, Austin, and Silicon Valley. We look at new techniques and we say, here's what our policy says, but if we do this, does it still make sense in the intent of the policy and what we're trying to do? So we're setting up experiments, we're failing fast, learning from it, and moving on. So that's some of the stuff that we're doing.
Yeah. And when we talked in our prep call, we talked about sort of the single sign-on challenge and how you can't get every system in. I'd like to frame that in a slightly different way, because when Jose was talking earlier, you stressed the importance of focusing on the data layer there. And is the data layer for identity and access management sufficient to the needs right now, or is that one of the challenges to really get that underlying framework right before you can start to add the other parts on? And I don't know, Shane, can I sort of toss that to you first?
Sure, yeah. So it's probably not sufficient today, right? But they're going in the right direction. I don't know if you've seen the new OMB draft memo that's out, just came out on Friday, and I think that's one of the things they touch on, right? So it's driving that information sharing across agencies, but in doing it the right way. It's easy to share information, but it's real easy to share information that you don't need to, because that is easier way to get it done, right? So we need to look at doing it the right way, right? So across the government, even if you look at DMVs, there's a lot of PII, a lot of information about users that we need to verify and validate those identities, identity proof these people that are coming in. And we can leverage that, and we're starting to leverage it. I think login.gov pulls in from DMVs, and I think that they're doing a lot of good things, but we just need to make sure we're doing that in the right way, right? So that PII and a person's identity, something that needs to be protected. So we need to continue to do that, and I think Jose touched on this too, but blockchain I think opens up a lot of options for that too. It needs some development before it's anywhere near ready to go live, but being able to share attributes kind of on the back end, right, where the relying party never actually sees it, but they have trust in that it was verified and that information's there on the other side. So I think if we continue to kind of chase some of these new technologies, that it's really going to open the doors and make it easier to share that information in a safer way.
All right. And Tom, I'd like to put sort of the same question to you, because DoD doesn't always get full credit for how big and important an accomplishment CAT cards are. Getting to that point of having the physical access and the digital access and close to enterprise-wide is more than a lot of organizations do. But both DISA and the OCIO have talked about, this doesn't work for all needs. Two-factor authentication is not enough factors. Are you having to sort of tackle that sort of fundamental architecture? Are there challenges there, or do you feel like the framework's in place?
Yeah, there's lots of challenges.
Yeah.
Because we have about 3 million folks in the DoD that are DoD employees, Army, military, or reservists, and then we have millions of contractors, and we have millions of partners. So it's a huge infrastructure. DMDC does a really good job with the Common Access Card, but we have to get beyond that. And we talked about the data layer. So one of the things how many people are here of KPMG auditors? You probably know accounting and audit, FISCAM and stuff. So one of the big things when I was at the Department of Homeland Security was we got a relatively clean audit 5 years in a row. And DoD, we're just starting out in that journey. We've had some pockets, but DoD-wide, we're moving out to that. So think about that piece, finance. Think about intelligence. So whenever we go to war, we're fighting on at least 3 networks. If we're fighting with coalition partners, there's 70 coalition partner networks. These are physical networks. So there's all that cost, all that complexity about accounts, all about how you validate where you should be and where you need to go. So if we can consolidate that and base it all on encryption and data labeling, data tagging, saying this bit of data is accessible to these 10 partners or this one person on the mission side. On the financial system side, and other business side, if the auditors know in IT controls, probably the 2 biggest ones are role-based access. So if you are a person issuing an invoice, you can't be the one to approve the payment for that invoice. So role-based access. Can we do that on the data layer side there too? So when you go in, the system automatically knows that you can issue a request for purchase, but you cannot approve that payment for that product that you bought. So the data layer is incredibly important. NSA has made some great progress in that. Would like to be able to move that throughout the whole of DoD. And then with our partners, CAC just won't last. So how do we get multi-factor authentication, like you'd mentioned from DISA, and Al Lin, the former director, said we should be able to use our smartphone, right? Now we got some problems with that, because how do we take that into a secure space? But we can figure out that problem. And the reason is, if we give everybody a handheld device, we can give them a screen and a keyboard. We don't need to give them a computer anymore. If you're a soldier on the battlefield, or a sailor, or an airman, and that phone is with you, it can tell from the way you're talking, the way you're moving, when you last use it, to say, with a certain percentage of risk, we believe this is the right person with that device on you, and as you come up to the weapon system, or the computer, or access to a ship or a plane, it says 90% this is the person it is, based on that phone. So we're, again, experimenting on several things. The data layer, how do we collapse 80-some systems into one physical system? And the way we provide access is data tagging on all the data in there, because it's really the data and information that's important. And then with whatever device, hopefully moving towards a multi-factor device, does the person have access to this network, to that piece of data, or not? Does that help?
No, it does. It does.
Absolutely.
And Robert, I don't want to. If you want to add on to that, I want to give you that opportunity. But I want to sort of push the conversation forward a little bit on the, how this approach to identity management and access management sort of plays into the overall cybersecurity strategy. Because Tom just touched on it; it's come up a few times. But are the main benefits that you're looking for right now in that efficiency, reducing time, reducing cost side, or are there ways to take this data layer and bring the advanced analytics to it to help with the broader cybersecurity efforts? Like how do you make sure that the identity access management isn't this silo over here, and that you're leveraging this data and intelligent tools to the fullest possibility?
Well, we were talking about the data layer, and if you look at the OSI model, you got your 7 layers. Well, the 8th layer is always budget, and the 9th layer is culture, right? And so if you look at my time at DoD as well, it's all about securing the data and making sure that bad guys don't get to the data. NOAA, you flip that on its head. It's a taxpayer-funded scientific organization, so the attitude of the multi-thousands of scientists we have in NOAA is, hey, it's all paid for anyways, we should be giving this away. Absolutely you should, but you should be giving it away, keeping in mind the CIA triangle, right? How do you know that it's actually your data that you're giving away? It hasn't been modified, hasn't been changed. You can give it to the right people when they need it. So yes, you need to be able to make sure that that data is easily accessible, but you have to have a culture that understands, is that the right data at the right time for the right person? So you have to build in that data layer modeling to understand who gets what, and separate out the idea of the machine that does the weather forecasting is not the same machine that runs the web server that gives you that data. So that way, if you hack this one, you don't get to this one. So you have to build that in on a cultural level and on a data layer analysis level, which gets you to the culture and the business processes. If you don't know what your business processes are that you're trying to solve the problem with, then you have no really good way of figuring out what the processes are that you need to tag, like tagging all those multiple points on the data.
Shane, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think that you made a really good point there at the end, Robert, around kind of the governance and looking at the business processes. I mean, from my experience, we've seen a lot of IAM implementations, tool implementations fail when our clients are focused on the tool, focused on the technology. We have this issue, this tool is going to fix it when I put it in.
Right.
And that's just not how it works, right? Yeah. So the identity and access management really impacts the business processes around how those things are there. And if you don't start with that as your foundation level and really spend the time to understand your processes, how they are today, which most people don't.
Right.
If you don't understand those and understand how they're going to be impacted by this change, then you're going to have trouble as you go through implementation.
So I want to open up to the audience in just a second, but my bias is always to focus on the friction points and where are the problems we have to fix, and we can do that. But let's try and be positive on this. Who's doing this right? Where are the examples where an agency or part of an agency is really taking full advantage and moving this forward? I think the stuff that DISA and General Lin's talked about of do it with the phone, identify you by your walking gait is, is fascinating. I don't think it's really in practice anywhere yet. Where's the exemplar that you guys would point to of like, we should all be trying to be like those guys?
Got me stumped. Yeah, you got me stumped, sorry.
So
Honestly.
again, this is a more of experimentation.
Sure.
And it's assistance, it's an automation piece. So when you walk up to some of the customer work protection sites, they can recognize your face with your passport and your data is already up, so that speeds up the process. So that's a nascent way to use automation with the data management to get a mission done. So I think that's a good one. The data layer piece, the tagging, we're still using CAC or some kind of hard token to do this, but NSA's ability to tag data and set up relationships to say, if you're this person, we know you're this role, and we know you get access to this data. It's all one big data store, which saves money. It's faster for lethality. You don't have 100 different systems you got to provision and stand up and maintain. So I think that piece is good. We'll get to the credential piece eventually. So I think those are, and the third one, I really like the identity matching engine for security. The idea that it's continually updating the fact whether you should have that credential or not. And I need to say one more alibi. So how many people here have a security clearance? How many people took a long time for you to get your security clearance? One more. How many are waiting for their security clearance? So one of the things that we're looking at doing is when you start a security clearance is there'll be an automated background check automatically. There'll be a risk assessment done automatically and say, for this clearance, for this purpose, this is good enough for now. And then for ongoing periodic reviews, a lot of it will be automated. So based on the automation, it'll say, we don't need to send an investigator out. We're 90% confident we'll only take this risk for this mission. So we're looking to speed up your credential that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, in my clients, I don't think anyone has the complete picture of where to go, but a lot of them are doing some very good things in specific areas, right? So to mention, right? So I think anyone that's looking to move their IAM to the cloud is on the right path, right? Identity as a service, it's going to lower your cost, and it's going to be a lot better in the long term. So especially as they're moving other stuff to the cloud through modernization efforts, I think that's really good. And then the other one that, and I think it's even easier to hit, especially once you start bringing intelligent automation, some RPA into it, is kind of around the access certification, right? So that's something that everyone has to do all the time, right? But if you can automate that and get some intelligence built in, you can do it constantly, right? So, and what that enables you to do is really almost turn that certification process into a risk-based authentication process, right? So I'm constantly looking at this and seeing who's accessing what and why, and I can flag that based on then, you can add in geolocation. I think risk-based authentication, the idea has been out there for a while, but it's still difficult to implement. But AI is something that's going to make that a reality much sooner. So people that are chasing that right now, I think, are ahead of the game.
Great. Questions from the audience for our panelists? I think we've had a quiet crowd today. Okay. Want to sort of give a last wrap up, and we will go to those friction points because those are always easier to come up with. Sure. But if, and I think some of you have answered this in different ways already, but if there was one thing that we should be focused on fixing right now, if you could fix one thing either at your agency or government-wide in the identity and access management space, what should we be focused on? Robert, we'll let you start.
I would say interoperability of our systems. I mean, if you can mint it once and use it multiple times, that's definitely beneficial. But there's a load and a cost associated with that. And while I'll grant you that going to the cloud certainly simplifies that, because then you can push that misery onto someone else. But the reality of it is that there's a lot of heavy lifting to do. I mean, how many thousands of apps does each of our agencies have that require some sort of authentication? How many different specific applications, all those other tools? So interoperability is key for that. If you can get past that first layer and then use that intelligence automation to push, okay, I've already identified myself once. I know that I'm the right person. Let me do these other things now automatically instead of having to re-enter. That would be where I'd push.
Okay. Shane?
I would focus kind of within, especially some of the larger agencies, you see a lot of silos. It's a lot of identity silos where you'll have competing kind of identity and access management programs within the same organization. And I think that that's something we should look to consolidate probably at a higher level, get them to the CIO level or would it be in the agency, and kind of a consolidated vision, right? So I think if we're committed to making IAM better, across the government or within your agency, and you can just get together and focus on like, okay, this is our plan, this is where we want to get to, and understand a bit where you are, I think that then people are going to get on the right path. But it's a struggle to do that sometimes right now for a lot of different reasons. But if you can do that, get together, focus that one plan, kind of drive forward. All right, here's our roadmap, build that out. This is where we want to be in 3 years, 5 years. You'll have a lot better chance of getting there.
Great, and Tom, you get the last word.
Yeah, I'm going back to the multi-factor, maybe even formatless way to identify yourself. Because it made me think about another one we're trying to do, and that is the e-health record. We're doing that throughout DoD, Veterans Affairs, and now Coast Guard's announced coming on board with that. And we went out and we tried to give anesthesiologists a CAT card in a surgery, and they said, I can't do this. And there's one device, and all of them have to use it, so how do we enable the system to give the right accesses quickly, whether it's in the hospital or on the battlefield? We need to figure something else out besides that.
Very good. Well, gentlemen, thanks all three. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.